With each clip, these sentences become harsher and harsher, so make sure to stick around for the most shocking punishment of all time. Corrupt cops reacting to life sentences. Michael Doltro. Police officers like Michael Doltro blurred the line between cop and criminal. This corrupt cop already had a criminal record in Edison, New Jersey, stretching all the way back to 1998. How he was then able to join the police force for 9 years is beyond anyone, and a clear indication that the system could do better.
Mr. Doltro, through his conduct and his admissions, spanning from 1998 to this year, represents the worst that we could possibly expect from someone in our society.
Doltro already had 18 convictions before joining the police force, and instead of cleaning up his act and going straight, he decided to use his position to rack them up from 18 to 40. Some of his crimes include conspiracies to tamper, slashing a tire, unlawful access to systems, and intimidating a witness. It sure seems like someone was trying to jeopardize the police force from the inside, but we'll leave that up to you to decide. Doltro's straw that broke the camel's back came in May 2013, though, when he apparently had some sort of grief with his captain, Mark Andreco, and instead of talking it out like any normal person, Doltro instead decided to set Andreco's house on fire, which also had his wife, 2 kids, and 92-year-old mother. Thankfully, no one was hurt, but it's a dark irony that Doltro committed crimes most likely worse than most of the criminals he put away.
How could it, when we've allowed this particular individual like him, here in Middlesex County, here in Edison, to do the things that he's done, similar to what we see on the news every day from other parts of the country?
Obviously, the hammer of justice doesn't play favorites, and Doltro was tried like any other criminal. And throughout his trial, the judge was clearly both angry and disappointed. Doltro was eventually charged with several crimes and sentenced to 20 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 17 years. Now, he really doesn't want to meet anyone he put in prison on the inside, and we can only imagine what that would be like. Corrupt cops who care little for human life can sometimes feel the same towards other criminals, like the case of Marcus Eberhardt and Howard Weems. Marcus Eberhardt and Howard Weems, who took police brutality to fatal extremes. This tragic story started with a 911 call made in East Point, Georgia. The caller, Aisha Smith, reported her 24-year-old boyfriend, Gregory Towns, for domestic abuse. Everything was going normally enough, with officers Eberhardt and Weems arriving on the scene, and instead of heroically saving the day, they became the villains of this story. Eberhardt and Weems handcuffed Towns, but to get him to walk to the patrol car, they started tasing him. Normally this would be once or twice, but the 2 officers did it 13 to 14 times. Obviously, this is way too much for one person to handle, and Towns died of electrocution.
I think moving forward, I would no longer put my faith in police officers, the courts, or anything like that.
The 2 officers were obviously put on trial, and the guilt ate Aisha Smith up, saying that she wished she'd never called the police that day, but she couldn't have known that the police would inflict such horror.
I carry a lot of guilt to this day.
The trials of Eberhardt and Weems were interestingly different, however, and both men got very different sentences. Weems was sentenced to 5 years in prison for involuntary manslaughter, reckless conduct, and violation of the police oath. Eberhardt, on the other hand, seemed like he was the one who ordered the tasing of Towns, and he was found guilty of felony murder and aggravated assault, getting a whole life sentence. A cop out of control needs a colleague to put him in his place, like John Canfield. John Canfield, who became such a threat that he had to be put away by a fellow officer. The Mississippi cop used to be described as one of the best detectives on the force, but he had one fatal flaw: the devil in a bottle, alcohol. However, drinking problems could in no way justify what he did to 5 school kids in April 2017 in Ponciana. When he was drunk, he ran into a group just leaving their bus and went on to crash into another car. In a scene of true horror on the street, one of the kids called her dad, an officer, J.J. Quintana, who had to be the hero of this story, chasing down Canfield and putting him away.
I, as a parent, cannot erase the vision that he had to endure that day.
Out of the 5 kids Canfield horrifically hit, 13-year-old Jaheim Robertson lost his life to the one person who was supposed to protect him and others.
You took that away from me. You took that away from my family. You took that away from his sisters.
The other 4 were injured, and Canfield stood trial. After everything he had done, Canfield had the nerve to refuse a blood alcohol test, which he was later forced to do. To no one's surprise, his alcohol levels were double the legal amount, and instead of owning up to it and admitting his fault, he tried to weasel his way out of the charges like the criminals he was clearly inspired by, and tried to say that it was a medical issue, not from drinking.
This is not a drinking and driving issue. This was a medical issue.
The judge was no fool, however, and didn't buy it, sentencing Canfield to 35 years in prison. So by the time he gets out, his other 4 victims would almost be at the age he was when he was put away. Worth reflecting. Some officers, however, like to do their crimes in secret, but everything comes out eventually, such as Braulio Gonzalez, who personifies what a true wolf in sheep's clothing is like. This former Miami-Dade officer was arrested in 2018 for horrors he was committing all the way back in 2011. However, this cop/criminal didn't take out his demons on criminals, but on innocent minors. An anonymous victim came forward and exposed Gonzalez for sexually assaulting her ever since she was 8 years old, even holding her at gunpoint and threatening to kill her family.
So I am ordering you to stay away from the victim, okay? No contact with the victim.
Yes,
All right.
Not only that, but he also apparently did the same to her sister. Truly sickening. The accusations seemed extreme until it became public knowledge that Gonzalez beat some ex-girlfriends to the point of breaking their bones. Domestic abuse simply takes down any shred of doubt of accountability. As you can imagine, this was a very quick open and shut case, as there's no room for arguing with monsters like that. On trial, some, including his wife, even tried to defend him, and the defense argued that he had saved lives during his career. But the judge had no sympathy for a devil who did a couple of good deeds.
But some things are so bad that they can overshadow the good we've done. And the bottom line is, you may have saved those lives at those times, you may have been a good police officer, but your daughters are going to live with this for the rest of their lives.
Gonzalez, knowing that he was guilty, kept quiet the entire trial and refused to make any comments. Silence is probably something good to practice in prison, as he received a life sentence instead of 48 years.
On every count, I'm sentencing you to life in prison.
He might want to sleep with one eye open too, as some inmates don't take too kindly to child molesters in prison. Speaking of abuse of power, for some, it's a downright addiction, such as Daniel Holtzclaw. Daniel Holtzclaw, who might just be the worst offender on this entire list. Holtzclaw was a police officer for Oklahoma City, but instead of standing up for the little guy and helping those in poorer areas, he used the warrants or criminal records of poor African Americans to force them to do what he wanted. And what he wanted was revolting.
His private is out. I started to do oral on him, and at this moment I'm thinking like I don't have a choice. In
August 2014, Holtzclaw was arrested for sexually assaulting a 57-year-old, Janie Liggins. But this one victim opened up the floodgates of all the messed up things he was doing, including forcing people to have sex with him, rape, sexual battery, lewd exhibition, stalking, and forcible oral sodomy. Holtzclaw was charged with 16 counts of these crimes, and this number quickly rose to 36.
He stopped me here. He assaulted me here. He drove me here. Then he drove me over here and dropped me off.
To imagine that this quote-unquote cop had arrested others for sexual assault when he was most likely doing 10 times what they were doing and deserved to share the cell with those he put away. Since 2013, 13 women came forward to testify against Holtzclaw, and despite pleading not guilty, advancements in investigation technology were not in his favor, and he was found guilty using DNA and GPS tracking. In court, the judge seemed flabbergasted at how horrible a cop could be, and even dismissed all the good he might have done in his line of work.
Defendant is guilty of the crime of forcible oral sodomy, and punishment is set at 20 years.
Ultimately, Holtzclaw was given 263 years in prison. And if only humans could live that long, then maybe there would be enough punishment for what he did to his victims.